really good shape. Oh my God.
All right, we're going to get to a part where we study rules, and that's a day where you need to bring some coffee. But still, nevertheless, very, very important. Here's Guided Flight Discovery Ground School Pilot 2 Day, or Private Pilot Day 2. There's the agenda. We checked off day 1 today. Ground Lesson 3, 4, and a Stage 1 exam. Now, the Stage 1 exam is online. I think it's 58 questions. The test bank changes just a little bit. So that, well, a couple of reasons. Sometimes the material changes slightly. And another reason is, you don't want the people from the previous class telling the other class, what's going on. It could happen. This is a nice test to assess how much information you've absorbed from me being up here spitting some slides at you, okay? Now, if the questions seem a little bit difficult, challenging, whatever, that's fine. Allow that to happen. Remember, I was talking natural consequences. I am an instructor that does not teach to a test. If I want you to pass a test, you know what's really easy for me to do? They do it in the United States all the time. They teach exactly to the exam. Okay, well, this is what you have to know. I know what the questions are, so I'm going to teach you those questions. You won't know anything. You'll be able to take a nice little test and a written exam, but you won't be able to apply that ever. Okay? You got to get the knowledge and the base and then take an exam objectively and measure. Hey, how did I work out? So tomorrow we'll talk about some test scores. I think everybody do well. Do your best, but again, no anxiety over the whole thing. It might be a little challenging. Okay, here we go. Guided Flight Discovery, Chapter 3. This is Ground Lesson 3, Aerodynamic Principles. Woo! Again, tighten your seatbelts on this one, okay? 2 hours of ground is Pilot Handbook of Aeronautical Knowledge, Chapter 4 and 5. Just very, very skin-deep aerodynamics. Here's our key terms. Not too bad on this one. Lift, weight, thrust, drag. Got a couple 4 forces of flight. Vectors. What is a vector? Very important. Remember yesterday I drew a dot, and then I had a line segment from that with an arrow? An idea of a vector, a ray, in other words, a direction and a magnitude. This is going to explain and describe how forces act, and we can use this and apply Newton's second law. All right, well, that's great because look, Newton's 3 laws of motion, Bernoulli's principle, we touched on it yesterday. We'll dig in a little deeper on that today. Venturi, airfoil, okay. Leading edge, trailing edge, upwash, downwash, relative wind, camber, chord line, angle of attack, coefficient of lift. All of those, that's just an airfoil. Descriptive terms of an airfoil. I'll show you a picture. We'll become familiar with this airfoil, and then what we'll do, we'll start gathering some more understanding of how does this airfoil work as it flows through the air. Just a nice little fluid, a very thin fluid, but still, it works. Stall, what does it mean to stall? Does that mean the engine shuts off? No, of course not. The engine doesn't shut off. It means I stop producing lift on the airfoil. I wish I could stall a propeller. I thought about that last night. For like 10 or 15 minutes, it's like, how can I do this? I know I can stall a compressor in a turbine airplane, but see, look at that. That's where the tie went. All right, critical angle of attack. What does that mean? Well, this is how I stall an airplane. Anybody ever asks me, how do I stall an airplane? Well, this is simple. You exceed the critical angle of attack. The answer is done and over with right then. They cannot say not one more thing. Don't describe a procedure. Okay, carburetor heat on, do my clearing turns, look outside. No, you don't need any of that. I need to stall the airplane. All right, aspect ratio, kind of describing this wing and the wing area, plan form, angle of incidence. Some of these airplanes, believe it or not, all of the training airplanes are designed to fly stable. These things will fly very, very well, even if the pilot, and especially if the pilot, doesn't apply any inputs. Okay, I got a great story on that, and it involves a government airplane in the U.S. and a couple of pilots that lost their job. It was kind of interesting. All right, stall strips. What are these? Flaps configuration, a couple of different ways that airplane manufacturers produce flaps. Plain flap, split flap, slider flap, and Fowler flap. We'll go through, take a look, and describe how does each one look and what are the characteristics of each one. Drag, You got to have lift, but the only way you can produce lift is to get some drag. So parasite drag and form drag, interference, skin friction, induced drag. This is the one that I get whenever I produce lift. Wingtip vortices and ground effect. Okay? So key terms real quick. We'll go through that and figure out what the next couple steps are. 4 forces of flight. What are they? Well, there they are. Write those down. Remember that, because those are the 4 forces of flight. Oh my gosh, that's not it at all. All right, but it looks like that. Of course, what makes airplanes fly? Money. Yeah. The FAA keeps dragging us back, and these are our dreams. Reality is we're being sucked back towards the earth all day long. All right. So the real 4 forces of flight: lift and weight, thrust and drag. There's a couple of things that I know about flight instructors, and I know that flight instructors do certain lessons and say the same thing each time, and some of it is just a matter of the industry. You know, we have a lot of flight instructors that get produced and they hear the same thing over and over and over again, and some of it is really close to being correct, but if we really dig into it, it's not always. So you'll hear all forces of flight have to be equal to be unaccelerated. And that is not true, okay? Not all 4 forces of flight. Keep in mind and follow me for a while. Like I say, sometimes the ride is going to get a little bumpy when you guys are talking to me, when I'm talking to you. But hang on just for a second. So we have 4 forces of flight, but I don't need all 4 of these to be in exact balance for me to have unaccelerated flight. Okay? Let's talk for a second about accelerated flight. What is acceleration? How do I get acceleration? Who are my Newton fans?
Changing our speed. Changing the velocity.
Okay, right. The time rate of change in velocity. Okay? That's exactly right. You're right. It's the time rate of change of velocity. Okay? So velocity has a direction and magnitude. I could either change it with the magnitude or direction. Angular acceleration. Fine. Accelerating means I'm changing my speed. Okay? So if I'm not changing speed, that means that 2 forces that are equal and opposite are exactly the same. All right? Now these 2 forces, if they're at a 90-degree angle, there is no component. Where are my component vectors? Who knows how to think like a component vector? Okay, we'll find out. All right, so if I have 90 degrees, I have a coordinate system. These 90-degree angles, they don't bother each other at all. So whatever I have with thrust and drag, this won't affect the straight line 90-degree difference in lift and weight. Are we okay? I'm going to try to stop this soon, but it's important. So thrust and drag, if they're exactly the same, the airplane has a constant speed. Because we just now said accelerated flight, or acceleration, is a rate of change in velocity. Let's call that speed for a moment. Okay? If the speed isn't changing, are we accelerating? Nope. So that means thrust and drag are equal. If I'm flying at my cruise speed, what's my favorite cruise speed? You're right, depends on the airplane. 120 in the airplane. And why is 120 my favorite airspeed? It's exactly 2 miles a minute. So if I know that I'm 90 miles away from somewhere, well, that's 45 minutes. It's easy math, and I gotta have easy math. So my favorite cruise speed is 120. If I'm flying at exactly 120, that means however much force I have out of that propeller is the exact same amount of force that I have from drag. Okay, great. If I slow down, however I do this, if I slow the airplane, that means now I have more drag than thrust, and the airplane decelerates. Okay. Lift and weight are going to work the exact same way. Am I going to change the weight in the airplane appreciably? We're going to use a little bit of fuel, probably consume a little bit of oil. Okay, these things will happen. I might exhale a little bit of carbon dioxide, which weighs more than oxygen. All right, don't get started about exhaling and all this. We're not micromanaging this thing. But for the most part, my weight is going to remain constant. Very, very close. The change is negligible. How much does a Cessna weigh? Anybody got an idea? I've been tossing around some ideas. Yeah, 2,300 pounds, about 2,300 pounds. Okay? Some more, I think that's about 1,000 kilograms. Pretty easy, nice, simple number to understand and appreciate. So if I have 2,300 pounds in weight and my airplane is not changing altitude at all, it's not accelerating at all, that means that my lift is the exact same as weight. So I have exactly 2,300 pounds of lift. Do I need 2,300 pounds of thrust? Well, I wish. Right, so not all four forces are going to be equal in unaccelerated flight, but the ones that are opposite to each other, those are going to be exactly equal if I'm unaccelerated. All right, one more just tidbit of information just to set the stage, okay? The airplane is flying at 120. I love 120. So I'm moving in that direction at 120. If I'm not changing any altitude, you guys would agree I am unaccelerated, correct? What if I'm descending at exactly 500 feet per minute? Am I also unaccelerated? Before anyone says anything, I am. I'm descending, but I'm doing it at a constant rate. So I'm descending at exactly 500 feet per minute. I'm not accelerating that way. I'm not accelerating this way. That's unaccelerated flight. The same is true for a climb. If I have a climb at an exact airspeed, an exact climb rate, I am not accelerating. I'm moving that way. I'm moving this way, but I'm not accelerating, okay? All right, enough with Newton for a moment. Let's talk about some of these ideas. In straight and level flight, unaccelerated, lift is equal to and directly opposite weight. Thrust is equal to and directly opposite drag. Out of all four of these forces, there's one that I can't change the direction. I can never change it. And if I could, who's seen Marvel's Avengers, right? You'd be that guy Thanos that snaps his fingers and stuff happens or whatever. Okay, that's fine. I'd be some superhero if I could change the direction of weight. I can't do it. So that's why I have always a coordinate system with weight at the bottom. I can change the direction where my thrust is delivered. I can pitch the nose up, I can pitch the nose down. Change it. I can change the direction in which lift is delivered. It's perpendicular to my longitudinal axis, perpendicular to that chord line, okay? So if I pitch the nose up or pitch the nose down, I'm changing the direction in which this lift is generated. I change the direction in which drag is generated based on my flight path. But what I need to do is always adjust those changes so that they're in line with weight, okay? We'll see how this works when you pitch the nose of the airplane up, for instance. I might have my lift backwards. Well, that makes me slow down a little bit because some of that lift is being used along the drag line or the drag coordinate. All right? All right. Here's an exact idea of what we're talking about. When vertical and horizontal forces, vectors, are added, the resultant acts diagonally. So if this is my lift, the total lift that's generated by the airplane, and this could be an airplane in banked flight. It doesn't have to be climbing or descending. This could be an airplane in banked flight. Some of that lift is along the vertical scale, and some of it is along the horizontal scale. So this horizontal one is causing the airplane to turn, and this one is causing the airplane to not accelerate. Okay? All right, so that's the sum of vectors, or adding vector. Think like a component vector. Okay, very important aspect of aerodynamics. The resultant of two opposing forces that are equal magnitude is 0. So lift, weight, those two are the exact same. The answer is goose egg. I have no force affecting that airplane in the vertical axis. Okay? The more we can understand simple principles like this, the easier it will be for you to perform your duties as pilot in command. I cannot tell you how many times, and it's frustrating for flight instructors, it's frustrating to the students, it's frustrating to Joe and Andre and everybody involved. I cannot tell you how many times I've seen a pilot come across and yeah, they studied the written exam. Look, the written exams, I have tried to contact and reach out to Oklahoma City and make that written exam 1,000 times more difficult than it is. Because the written exam, the FAA written exams are easy. They're way too easy. And all of these test aids that they have out there, hey, you know, Shepherd Air and Dauntless and all this other stuff, they make that study aid a piece of cake where I can go on there and I can ace that exam. I can do better than ace it. I can score high 90s. What did I say yesterday about somebody who scores high 90s on a written exam? They probably can't fly the airplane to save their life. Okay? That's a true story. People come through and if you get 100 on the exam, it doesn't always work out this way. But typically speaking, the people that get 100 on the exam just studied very well to get that exam. It's not very difficult at all. They wrote the 100 and then they can't fly the airplane just to even save themselves. All right? That's what I've found out of experience. But like I said, I can't tell you how many times pilots come over, they've got a great written exam test, they don't understand this, they were able to memorize the answers, and then they can't fly the airplane. And whose fault is it every single time? Well, the flight instructor was this, or Joe didn't give me that, or weather was bad, the airplane was wrong, anything else. Some of these things that I'm sharing with you right now are make and break deals. The more you understand this, the better you will be at becoming a pilot in command, I promise. Okay, what's going on here? We looked at it yesterday. We looked at it yesterday with the carburetor. Okay, I got Bernoulli. This is a Venturi. And what did Bernoulli discuss? What did he discover and kind of write about?
The velocity
of a fluid, okay, and that's fine.
increases and pressure decreases.
It will happen like that every time, okay? So if I take the cross-section of a cylinder and reduce it volumetrically, in other words, just pinch it in the middle like we have here, then I've created a demand for an increase in velocity. Okay, there's a couple ways to do that. They do that in a carburetor. Okay, we also do that in airfoils. And this is one of the principles by which an airfoil produces lift. Okay, Bernoulli's. Now, we looked at it. Is everybody okay with this? Typically speaking, Bernoulli is not a problem. If I increase the velocity of a fluid, the pressure decreases. An air is a fluid. It exhibits characteristics exactly like any other fluid. Water, whatever in the world you got. Okay? So this is Bernoulli, and that's one idea behind what we have for lift. All right. Now we talk about an airfoil. Some of these components of this airfoil are extremely important. Without a very good understanding of these components, you will not likely succeed as a pilot. Okay? You just won't. So some of these components are tremendously important. Some of the terms that we use are used interchangeably whenever we discuss aerodynamics. So I need to know them and become terribly familiar with this. An airfoil. Now, why do I keep saying airfoil instead of wing or propeller or stabilizer or anything else? Because airfoil describes, this is a generic term. A generic term that means I have something that I'm producing lift with. That lift could be a wing that supports the majority of the weight of the airplane and has controls attached to it so I can maneuver in flight. Okay? That airfoil could be a propeller. It could be a horizontal stabilizer, a vertical stabilizer. They all work the exact same, but they serve different purposes. Okay? And just wait for the stability class. Oh man, I love stability. All right. So leading edge. What is leading edge? That's the first part. Leading means very first. And leading edge is this is the very first part which meets the airflow. Okay? Looking at this, what I don't see rapidly is I don't see the movement of this airfoil, which is important. But I do see an airflow. I see some fluid or some air moving over this. So everything is relative to that airflow. Let's take a look. That's the first part that meets the airflow. Then we got upwash, or this upper cambered surface. The upwash and ideas of boundary layer and stagnation point, and I got the way in which lift is formed. This all around revolves around the upwash. Okay? All right, so here I got upwash, which is one part of Bernoulli's principle. As that fluid comes upward, it's going to increase in velocity, which will result in a decrease in pressure. Okay. Trailing edge, leading edge, trailing edge. Pretty simple. Very, very simple stuff. And then downwash. Downwash brings me to where I enjoy one of the other aspects of lift. We got Bernoulli's principle, which is increasing the velocity of a fluid will decrease the pressure. So I got a low pressure system on that top part of the wing. And then downwash starts with, I got Newton's third law. Every action, there's an equal and opposite reaction. Okay? So second law real quick, we're talking about that force is mass times acceleration. Here we go. And then you have the third law. Every action is an equal and opposite reaction. So the action is I have some downwash. There's an equal and opposite reaction on the airfoil. Everybody okay so far? I got a lot of open eyes, which is good. Okay, let's talk. Where does that flow come from? The flow comes from the relative wind. I wish the FAA and aerodynamicists or whoever started discovering this stuff and writing about it would have used another word other than wind. Because wind makes me think that it's the wind that I see outside. Oh man, it's windy outside. There's nothing to do. There is no relationship to this relative wind and the wind that we have outside. Zero. Goose egg. Gosh, I wish they would have given it a different name. But it is wind or flow that's relative to the motion of this airfoil. Okay. Anybody rode a scooter or a motorcycle or a wave runner? Has anyone not ever done any of that? You've ridden in a car at least, right? Okay, of course. Okay. So we are riding something, some sort of vehicle. Easy little vehicle to operate. And I stick my hand out the window. Or I have the wind in my face, right? The wind. Where does that wind come from? It's relative to my motion. If I'm moving that way at 60 knots, then I enjoy a 60 knot wind in my face or on my hand out the window. That's relative wind. It doesn't make one bit of difference if the wind is blowing 10 knots from the northeast or wherever in the world this is blowing from. As far as atmospheric wind, no. And in an airplane, even less. Because in an airplane, I'm not even attached to the ground. I am riding along in the atmosphere, so I could really care less unless I consider my ground speed. And we'll do that tomorrow in our navigation class. Okay? So relative wind is the airflow which is parallel and opposite the flight path of the airplane. Okay. Then you've got this camber. The camber is a curved surface across the top and across the bottom. And there is one line. It's an imaginary line. I can't reach inside the airplane wing and look at it or the propeller and look at it. There's an imaginary line that's from the leading edge to the trailing edge, and it's a straight line. And that line forms an angle to the relative wind called angle of attack. We are getting somewhere now. Okay? Angle of attack is something that I can control in the airplane. I can control it with every airfoil on that airplane. I wish I could control it to the extreme on the propeller. I can control it with the propeller, but I usually just get turning forces. I can't exceed the critical angle of attack with it. I can control it with the wing by manipulating the controls and changing the way in which the wing attacks that air with the flight path. Okay. All right, that angle of attack, along with speed and air density and surface area of the wing, a few things that I can't change rapidly, right? Air density or surface area of the wings, hope not, right? That defines the total lift of this airfoil. Okay. Right now, do we have any questions? Because we are at the point where sometimes half the class just falls off the cliff. And then it takes a little bit longer to reel everybody in. If we're not there right now, please just ask me some questions.
This lift weight is situated vertically, or it is only at a component?
Okay, that is just the component. That's a fantastic question. Because, and I know you're paying attention, because that lift is just one of the four forces of flight. And like I said, I can't control the way gravity acts on the airplane. So this is opposite gravity. But 100% correct, and we see this in a subsequent slide, the total lift in the airplane is formed perpendicularly to this chord line. So my actual lift coming off that airfoil is like this. This airfoil will have some component of the lift used as drag. Okay? Everybody okay with that? I like that. That was really good. I'm excited. I really am. Pilots without a real firm knowledge of this material are going to struggle. Okay? You just will not know how to manipulate the controls on this airplane. You will not know how to make the airplane do what you want it to do. You can follow instructions, and an instructor can teach you a procedure, and the process may or may not be successful if everything else always stayed the same. But when you're up there and you need to make those decisions, when you're a pilot in command with responsibility and authority, and you have to make a decision based on principles, the procedure will not help you. The procedure that any flight instructor, there's not a flight instructor in the world that can forecast the future. I can't tell you what's going to happen on each and every single flight, and each and every single flight segment, what exactly will occur and how the atmosphere is going to affect you. What I can do is give you the principles and help you form decisions, informed decisions that will ensure your success every single time, okay? So again, I just can't understate the importance of this. Okay. One thing that Jepson does for us is they say, all right, make sure right away that I understand relative wind and flight path. Do not confuse the actual flight path with the flight attitude of the airplane. Flight path has nothing to do with attitude. What was attitude? Somebody tell me attitude. Let's review. Okay, it is the relationship of my airplane's axis, we'll get into axis, but it's the relationship of my airplane bank and pitch with the natural horizon. So this is a flight attitude, a pitch up flight attitude. I could consider this a nice pitch up flight attitude. This is a pitch down flight attitude, left bank, right bank, you see left and right bank attitude. Every one of these, let me figure this out. Before we get to VORs, on all my airplanes back home, I put a left here and a right here. Well, probably because I need to know my right from left. But then also, when I turn the airplane upside down, it makes it a little easier to understand. All right, so back to what I'm doing. The flight attitude of the airplane has nothing to do with your flight path. What is the flight path? This is another tremendously important concept. What is the flight path? I can't wait for you to be at SkyEagle. This is going to be awesome, okay? It's your trajectory. It's exactly the line in which you're following, your airplane is going. Now, something that we can do, which is really nice with ForeFlight, they just came out with this, is I can conduct a post-flight brief with you and show you your exact flight path. in 3D perspective. So as if we had a chase plane, I can show you where your flight path is. It's helped pilots understand and become a lot more successful in grasping these concepts. But just make sure that we understand here in the classroom, and the classroom is a wonderful place for theory. You know, the airplane is a terrible classroom. The classroom is a great place for theory and not really practice. But make sure we understand this theory of where that flight path is and what that curved line looks like always. If you can visualize and think through your flight path, you are 5 steps closer to being successful, okay? All right, fantastic. Here we go. Let's talk about how I can affect lift. How can I affect my total lift in the airplane? I know we got some smart people out here.
Change the angle of attack.
Angle of attack. We're just now talking it, right? I got angle of attack. I can affect my angle of attack on every airfoil. I'm going to stall that propeller. I promise you that much. Or I'll break another tie thinking about it. Okay? All right, so how can I change it? I change it with my angle of attack. Okay, what else can I change lift with? Perfect. Just remember those two. The lift equation has a long set of lists, okay? The terrible thing about what's happening in America right now is that math just got tossed out the window. I don't know how. I'm looking at the math my daughter's taking. I'm like, that's not even hard at all, right? But one thing that I found most of my Russian students is they're much better at math than we are, all right? And I actually had to learn math a long time ago. But look at this, lift. Lift is a function of, so I'm not really going to say equals, but I'm going to put this little line up there. Are we okay with that? It's approximate. It's a function of angle of attack and speed squared. Okay? So and there are some limitations. Every function will have some left and right limits. We'll have maximums and minimums. Yes, 100%. There are some functions here. But appreciate this as your basic lift equation. This is just the Greek letter alpha for angle of attack. And this is speed squared. So if I change my angle of attack, I affect the total lift on the airplane. There are some limits. I get a critical angle of attack. We're getting there. How do I stall the airplane? And then here I can see where's the low pressure on the top of the wing, where's the high pressure. This describes all Bernoulli's principles. What I don't see is that part on the backside with Newton's third law, the action-reaction. And that is a very important part of total lift. But I do appreciate here how it's angle of attack, and I'm changing that. I'm creating more or less lift. Okay. I would love if I could just increase my angle of attack and continue to increase that and get more and more lift. Of course I would. What do I also get with lift? Drag. Okay. Subsequent slides a little bit later on, pump the brakes on that for a moment. We do get more lift. We do get more drag at the same time, but there's a topping point. There's a point in which I no longer produce more lift. All right, appreciate this chart for a moment. Simple, vertical scale is lift. It says coefficient of lift. Just think about this as lift, okay? On the horizontal axis and increasing to the right, this is your angle of attack in degrees. Help me one time. 2 lines that form the angle for angle of attack. What are those 2 lines? Relative wind and chord line. Okay. So that angle between my flight path and the leading edge and trailing edge, the chord line, that angle that's formed, when I increase that angle, I get more lift until the airfoil stalls. And this describes a stalled airfoil. That angle of attack is called the critical angle of attack. So, how do I stall an airplane?
Decrease the speed or increase the angle of attack.
So those are procedures. I exceed the critical angle of attack, okay? Guaranteed every time. If I want to stall an airfoil, I exceed the critical angle of attack. Well, let's talk Air France 447. What did they do? Anybody know? An Airbus 330. Do you guys know? Everybody knows how big that airplane is? I rode on one of those on the way over. All right. They stalled that from 33,000 feet to the bottom of the ocean. All right? Now, I do not second guess flight crews or take a look at accidents and say, well, they should have known better. That's not me. That's just personally not who I am. That was a horrifying event, and I was not there in the airplane. I have no idea what that flight crew was going through. Okay? But taking a look at the air data computers, we could see that the airplane was stalled the entire time. So, what's that?
They had a blockage in pitot 2.
Which canceled the autopilot and placed the controls in alternate law. Neither pilot knew how to fly the airplane in alternate law. And the flight controls, so to be honest and to be fair, the flight controls performed differently. They behaved differently in alternate law than they would ever have behaved on this airplane. And neither one of those pilots were certified on how to fly that airplane like that. Okay, without getting too far into it, what could have happened? Well, I know 100% that they exceeded the critical angle of attack and it stayed there for the duration until everyone died. Okay, but what could have happened? How do you recover from a stall? Decrease your angle of attack. I promise you, 1,000% times over, guaranteed, you can make an airfoil fly again. You just have to decrease the angle of attack. Get it somewhere here where it's flying first. Okay? Now the pilots that were on board that airplane, they were doing exactly, and these were experienced pilots. They were following procedures, they were doing what they were taught, but did not comprehend what's happening here. And our industry as a whole have now embraced this idea very strong-heartedly. We will make sure before pilots assume the responsibility and authority as pilot in command that you know this, okay? So, yeah, I get excited about this stuff, all right. Kind of life and death, you know, whatever. All right, here we go. Separation starts. So what occurs? What do I experience during the stalling event? Because you will stall the airplane. You will stall the airplane hundreds of times, which is exciting, okay? But what happens as we stall the airplane? Well, you've got flow which goes over the airfoil. Let's just call this a wing for a moment because we can't stall certain parts. Well, I can stall the wing and we'll do that repeatedly. You've got airflow that goes on top and underneath this airfoil, under this wing, all the time. This creates lift, which allows the airplane to remain airborne and control, to maneuver the airplane, okay? As I get closer and closer and closer to the critical angle of attack, some of the smooth air begins to separate. And that smooth air becomes turbulent, okay? We've seen a stream, right? A river, a fast-moving river or a stream, you got rocks. And then the stream is nice and smooth, and all of a sudden on the backside it's very, very turbulent. Or it's moving in all directions, just very crazy behavior out of that fluid. This same thing occurs here. It's very unpredictable behavior out of the fluid, out of the air. And it begins at the back part of the airfoil. Real quick, which side of the wing is going to stall first? This one or this one? Where? The wing root. Okay, what was the idea there? Ailerons. I have control of the airfoil the entire time using ailerons. Okay, that one is a real double-edged sword. Okay, so let's pump the brakes on that for a minute. But yes, the airfoil will separate at the wing root and at the back side. I will feel this. You'll feel some airframe buffeting. It'll shake around a little bit. It's okay. It's very, very mild. Okay? In the Cessna, it's an enjoyable experience. And golly, did that really happen? Okay, whatever. Not such a big deal. When the airfoil stalls completely, I've got separation all the way at the front. And over the average of the wing span, I'm no longer producing sufficient lift to keep the airplane airborne. Which one of Newton's laws am I enjoying now? Force equals mass times acceleration. I have an unequal force, lift and weight. Because I don't have as much lift anymore, where does my airplane accelerate? down. Enjoy that. That part's fun. But you apply a rapid recovery. It's controlled. What are we at that point in time? 2 thumbs up and Fonzie. Nice and cool. All right? Cool like a cucumber. Apply your procedure. Make the airplane fly. Start a climb. Okay? You'll do it over and over and over again, and I promise you, you'll love every one of them. All right? Okay, here we go. How many people have already stalled an airplane? Stalled? Nah? Stalled? Stalled? No? I can't wait. All right. It's fun. All right, let's talk about different airfoils, okay? What kind of airfoils do I have, and how can I predict the performance that I'll get out of these things? Here's the wingspan. On the Cessna 172, it's 36 feet, okay? So I got a 36-foot wingspan. An average chord, leading edge to trailing edge, average across that entire 36-foot span is 5 feet. I can calculate the aspect ratio, and the units are different, whatever, but I can calculate a ratio of 7.2. The wing area is just, well, width times height. Okay, great. I got width times height. And the aspect ratio is just my wingspan divided by the average chord. What kind of airplane does that look like? Well, it's not really an airplane. What kind of aircraft does that look like? It's a glider? Okay. Gliders have very wide wings and real thin chord, correct? The aspect ratio is much higher. Okay, so I got my aspect ratio there, 20. Aspect ratio here is 7.2. This thing can glide nearly forever. If I find a nice updraft, I can climb without an engine. Okay? This is going to glide like a rock. All right? Whenever the engine stops running, you need to look outside and find a nice, easy place to put it down, and maybe one without alligators, okay, or sharks. All right. Remember my story about the guy that got eaten out there by the... Okay. Different wing plans or plan forms. How do these shapes look? Real quick, we're going to breeze through this. You're not going to spend a lot of time on plan forms because every airplane that you fly, training airplanes, will have what's called a Hershey bar wing. We got Hershey bars. It looks like a big rectangle. That's about what these wings look like. And the 172, it's slightly tapered at the back, but it's just a rectangular wing. That's about all it is. Here I got elliptical wings, rectangular. You got tapering. Tapering meaning that it just kind of tapers towards the front here, or the back, could be either way. This one tapers towards the front. Swept back wings. Where's my jet pilots? You're going to enjoy this, especially when we're talking about subsonic flow or Mach flow. And then swept back wings like the Concorde. All right, you're not going to fly that probably ever because it stopped flying. Who knows? Okay. Now then, longitudinal axis. Let's talk about the different axes on this airplane. I got 3 axes. If I say axis, we're okay with that. I'm thinking about a bicycle wheel and a tire. On the inside of that is an axle. On the inside of any kind of wheel or tire, I have an axle. What happens in the very center of that axle? It doesn't move, it just twists. So everything is going around that one point. Same thing is happening here. This longitudinal axis, or long from nose to tail, all the movement around that axis, or rolling movement controlled by the ailerons, goes right through the middle of that line. There's a couple of more. This line also has an incidental line. Incidental means not attached to or not connected to. Fine. So incidental line means that the wings already form a small angle of attack with relationship to this longitudinal axis. The wings are already at a little bit of an angle up. That way, as you and I fly, we can see out the front very well. If the wings were exactly parallel to that longitudinal axis, we would fly in level flight and would be looking up just a little ways, right? Okay. All right, so there's a longitudinal axis and an angle of incidence. I got a couple other axes. We'll talk about the wing root first, and I've already touched on this one. But before we get into the other axis, take a look at what's happening there at the angle of attack. Lower angle of attack at the tip, like I mentioned yesterday, for how we control the airplane during that stall event. And you got a much higher angle of attack at the wing root. The wing root, this is the part that's connected to the fuselage, right? You can see which part of that wing stalls first. You still have control of the airplane about its longitudinal axis using these ailerons, right up until the stall event. After the stall event, and as it continues to develop through the tip, that phenomena changes rapidly and actually goes the opposite way. We'll talk spins at the end of this lesson, but just know that a spin is a real thing, and also know that for you to get an airplane in a spin intentionally, a 172, you would have to be trained in how to do it, okay? It's not easy. It's very easy to get out of and very difficult to get into. So don't worry so much about a spin. Some pilots do. You won't have one, okay? I can almost promise you that you won't have a spin. Okay, again, here's a review of flight path and relative wind. Chord line with the flaps up and chord line with the flaps down. Okay, at the wing root, we've got flaps. If I look at the chord line, which is defined by 2 points, what are those 2 points? Leading edge, trailing edge. So if I lower, whoop, sound effects. If I lower these wing flaps, what have I done with my chord line? Changed the angle. Exactly. I have increased the angle of attack. Okay? So, an idea of what we got going on with flaps real quick before we turn into some other axis on the airplane. By extending the flaps, and flaps are high lift devices. By extending the flaps, I'm purposefully increasing the angle of attack at the wing root. We mentioned it, and we haven't gotten into depth on it yet, but I get one unfavorable characteristic each time I create more lift. So I can create lift based on this. Increase the angle of attack, more lift. Increase the speed, I get more lift at the square of that speed increase, okay? But one thing that I haven't addressed here at all is drag. Anytime you get lift, or I create any lift, additional lift will cause additional drag. So my flaps, high lift devices, I will create more lift, but what do I also get? Drag, a slower speed. This is important as I come in for my approach to landing. Or if I'm taking off, some pilots or some airplane manufacturers require use of flaps on takeoff as well. But for landing, if I look at an airplane with no flaps, you have a very flat descent angle. Now this is with constant airspeed and constant power. Okay? So if I maintain a constant airspeed and no flaps, I get a very flat descent angle or flight path. All right? Well, what if I had an obstacle here? There's always what if, when there's always an obstacle. I get it. So to avoid obstacles or to maintain maximum separation from obstacles at a slower airspeed, extend the flaps full. And I get a nice steeper descent path. Objects move faster downhill. So if I didn't have flaps, if I hadn't changed that wing or changed that airfoil, and I keep my flaps up, I could make the same flight path, but I'm going to do it at a higher airspeed. Okay? All right, so flaps are going to allow me to have a steeper descent path. Fine, fantastic. I did promise in the beginning we were talking about flaps real quick, so here we go. This is a plane flap. I don't have to be an expert on plane flaps. I don't have to be an expert on all the different flap types. So this is an opportunity for us to kind of unwind a little bit before we get into that next axis. That's a plane flap. That's a split flap where the upper cambered surface doesn't change, but the bottom part does. This produces a tremendous amount of drag and not as much lift. A slotted flap very similar to what we have on the Cessna 172, which will allow wind from the lower cambered surface to then go back over the top of the flap and create more lift. And then you've got a Fowler flap, which actually comes, almost the wing separates and comes apart, right? It goes down and aft, furthering that increase in chord line, an increase in angle of attack, because I'm pushing the trailing edge not only down, but aft, okay? All right, some of the other things we'll have, which we don't have on a training airplane, so we won't spend a lot of time on them, are leading edge flaps or slats, okay? Leading edge flap like this, a fixed slot, which might be just an opening in a wing to allow a higher angle of attack and slower airspeeds and more controllability. Spoilers, which just disrupt airflow completely and are used after you get the airplane on the ground. You extend the spoilers and just disrupt all of the airflow, okay? And then a movable slat, which is just that very front leading edge pushing forward and down, okay? These are usually, especially this side, this is usually on swept back wings. Airplanes that I need a much higher degree of control because they're faster, more maneuverable usually with this. And if I didn't have them, it would be difficult. It would take up a lot more runway, right? We don't have a whole lot of runway. Usually they're operating in and out of cities where you don't have a lot of room, okay? All right. Talking about drag, if I had just a coin, for instance, just a round coin that was in an airflow, you can see on the back side of that coin you get a tremendous amount of drag, a disrupted airflow, or turbulent air. Okay, that turbulent air is a function of your drag. That's creating drag on the airfoil. If I had a ball that was introduced into the airflow, well, I still get some, but quite a bit less. You can see considerably less. And these are just representations of what the airflow would look like around one of these objects. And then in airfoil itself, you can see now I've got smooth air going all the way on both sides. This is laminar flow or smooth flow, which encourages and helps develop the lift. I have very little lift developed by this. I could have some. You've seen baseballs, if they throw it and they put a spin on it, then it will lift in one way or another. I could get some lift out of this, but it's not very effective. An airfoil, tremendously effective, okay? All right, couple of different ways in which the airplane is going to be controllable. You either have a high wing airplane, which is very controllable and very stable, or a low wing airplane. This one has a multi-engine, so I do have two engines on this, but it's just an idea of a low wing and a high wing airplane. All right? The training airplanes are typically this. And these are very, very stable because the gravity is at the bottom of the wing. And the fuselage is all at the bottom of the wing. Most of the time, if pilots leave this airplane alone and they don't continue to apply control pressures, these airplanes will fly a straight path, a relatively straight flight path. Okay? Some turbulence might be involved. There may be a little bit of changes by atmosphere. But if you don't purposefully destabilize this airplane, it will fly straight. Okay? Some of the airplanes have rivets on them. And the rivets do disrupt some of the airflow. One of the airplanes that we have is a Cirrus. It does not have any rivets at all and has a very, very smooth airflow. Very good slow flight characteristics, very good stall characteristics. These disrupt airflow, but unfortunately it's part of the deal where you got to put the thing together, and what are they doing? They're putting it together with the least amount of weight and the very least amount of material or cost. Okay? All right, with drag, and discussing this idea of drag, you've got parasite drag. This is one of the two different types of drag that you're going to have on the airplane. Parasite drag means any drag that's created that's not involved with lift. So form drag, skin drag, all of the drag on the airplane. What's important about parasite drag is as you increase your speed, the drag also increases. You guys remember we were talking about a scooter or driving a vehicle and putting your hand out the window. Okay. If I increase my speed, what happens to the amount of force that I feel? It increases. That's very, very important to remember for parasite drag. What you're experiencing there is parasite drag. And it's exactly the same drag that we have on the airplane. But there's another little twist to it, and that is what happens when we create lift. Okay? All right, here you got high air pressure joins low air pressure at the trailing edge of the wingtips. We're producing lift. Wingtip vortices develop. Just an idea here what this wingtip vortice is. Who is familiar with the way that electricity flows? Or the way that fluid flows? It flows in the path of least resistance, correct? So the path of least resistance at the wingtip is I have high pressure at the bottom and I have low pressure at the top. With the wing involved in between, that creates lift. But at the very, very tips, and at the trailing edge, this will cause a wingtip vortice to develop, and some of that is going to push down on the back side of the wing.
The winglets.
Well, winglets were actually, they were invented decades ago, but this greatly reduced the amount of fuel that was consumed by airliners. Okay? Everybody okay with winglets? You've seen the winglets popping off the side of these things? Okay, that reduces airflow. And usually you see that on transport category airplanes. Okay? It reduces the wingtip vortice. It doesn't take them away completely, but it does reduce some of them. Okay? These wingtip vortices are responsible for creating downwash behind the wing. This is your induced drag. This is one of the drags that I have on the airplane. Completely separate from parasite. And it behaves differently as well. All right? Something else is we were discussing in the beginning the total lift of the wing or the airfoil. It's perpendicular to that average relative wind. So here I have my total lift. What part of that is opposite gravity? Well, the vertical component of it. Do I have another piece that's left over? Absolutely. There's another piece that's left over, and that's your induced drag. Okay? Now, induced drag behaves differently than parasite drag. We look at parasite drag. If I increase speed, the parasite drag will increase as a function of that speed increase. Okay, we know that. We're riding our moped or our motorcycle, our arm out the window. You go faster, you feel more pressure. It's parasite. It is some exponent. Yeah, it is exponential to it. Okay? Now, the wingtip vortices affect the wing a lot less as we increase airspeed. So induced drag will decrease as we increase airspeed. This causes one of the fundamental problems, and one of the first things that you're going to experience in your pilot training. And that is how to operate this airplane slowly. Okay? So, induced drag is there, parasite drag is there. How much drag is acting on the airplane? Is it just the induced or just the parasite? Both of them. It's completely both of them, right? So if I take this little bit and I add it up there, that's the total drag. And then I get a little curve like so. Okay. The bottom part of that curve is very interesting. Here is your total drag. But notice what happens. So think through this chart with me for a moment. If I'm flying my airplane at cruise speed, okay? Flying my airplane at cruise speed and I decrease my airspeed. What am I doing there with my total drag? I'm decreasing, what happens here? Okay, but so this creates a challenge. That's one of the first challenges that you'll have as a student pilot. How do I fly this airplane now slowly? We call that slow flight. Ta-da! And the FAA makes you do it, which is great. But it's a challenge. So let's talk through that challenge for a moment. I'm flying my airplane. Forget about configurations for a moment. Yeah, okay, flaps, landing gear, all this other stuff, that's great. You're going to do slow flight in any configuration, so it doesn't matter. This entire chart, the entire chart will shift to the left and upwards when you extend the flaps. Well, that's fine, doesn't matter. It looks the same. It's just the numbers are a little different down here. Okay. So I could do slow flight with flaps up, or I could do slow flight with flaps down. You'll do it with slow flight flaps down. That's just the way that is done, okay? Doesn't mean that you can't do it the other way, but just get used to doing it with the flaps down. It's also an exercise in flying the airplane in different configurations. I can't change the landing gear in this one, and I can't retract the landing gear, so I kind of get what I got. So flaps are down, and I want to fly the airplane slow. Okay? We start slowing. I'm maintaining level flight. Okay? I don't want to descend. If I descend, I'm not going to slow down. Things move faster when they go downhill. I don't want to climb. It's not a climb. I just want to fly level. Flaps down. Slow. What's happening with my engine setting? My power setting? Less and less, correct? Carburetor heat on because we're less than 2,200. All right, that's fine. But now we're slowing. Now what? What do I do now? With power setting. It doesn't stall. I'm still flying. A lot. Look at this. You are at cruise power setting. But the airplane is flying very, very slow. Close to stall, but if I'm flying level, it's not stalled. Because if I were flying level, which way am I going? I'm sorry. If I were stalled, which way am I going? Now, because I'm not creating as much lift. There's a rapid decrease in lift when I stall. So the airplane will accelerate downwards. I don't want that. I want to maintain level flight. How do I do this? In a Cessna, and you probably do this 2,000, 3,000, 4,000 feet. So what's air density like there? Less, right? Probably about 3-4 inches of mercury less. So about 10% less air density than I have on the ground. So I will probably have full throttle. Turn the carburetor heat off. Because carburetor heat is going to decrease the performance in the airplane. Okay? It'll help me not crash for carburetor icing. But once I'm up to power, I'm not going to have carburetor icing. Now, over 2,200 RPM, there's no carburetor icing. Turn off the carburetor heat. You will need almost full power in this airplane to maintain level flight if you're doing it correctly. Okay? Now you can maneuver the airplane. There's nothing at all wrong with maneuvering the airplane. I want to bank left, I bank left. Bank right, bank right. You could descend, but well, now I'm increasing airspeed. Unless you decrease power, you're not going to do a lot of climbing and descending. But you certainly will change directions, and you're required to. You're required to do that before... My airplane fell apart. You're required to do that before you can solo. Before you can act as pilot in command, you have to be able to fly the airplane as slow as it can possibly go and appreciate the fact that this side of that curve requires more power for level flight. This region, does anybody know what that's called? I'd love it if you do. Okay, backside of the power curve, or region of reverse control. Exactly. Okay? It requires more power to fly slower. Okay?
Is this on the exercise mode, or we use this mode when we land?
So you will, great question. You will do this while you're exercising in the air. You're doing your air work. During landing, you'll typically be above but very close to this. So if your landing conditions change just a little bit, like I said, the successful pilots are the ones that can think through and make decisions. So if you get a little bit slower here, maybe there's traffic in front of you, something you're trying to abide by, ATC controls. What do I have at the controls of an airplane every single time? A human being. So is it a possibility that I made a mistake? Sure. There is an opportunity here for me to know, revert to my training, stay alive, because I understand the concepts. Okay? So I may find myself slightly below here during an unexpected or an unusual approach to landing. But how do I manipulate those controls and not get myself into a tragedy? Oh, because I know a little bit and I understand some aerodynamic principles. Okay? Now, something else that's interesting about this chart. I love this chart. Okay. Something else that's interesting about this. This is called minimum drag, or LD max. LD max just means the lift divided by drag. At that point is maximum. I understand it's the lowest point, and that's because the drag is the lowest. So if I'm dividing by the least amount of something, then I get the maximum lift to drag ratio. Following me? This is the airspeed that will give me my best gliding distance. So when would I use my best gliding distance? If the engine fails, okay, stops running, or if I want to stay in the air for the longest amount of time. In other words, my maximum endurance. We haven't talked about different types of missions that you'll perform as a pilot in command. Maybe I want to stay in the air as long as possible. Maybe I'm operating a surveillance, right? I have a pipeline surveillance. How long do I want to stay in the air? For as long as possible. It's the most efficient cruising speed.
The lowest
okay?
fuel consumption.
If my mission is to stay in the air for the longest, let's be honest. People that want to fly on airplanes usually want to do what? Get there fast. So where am I going to be? Right? Way as fast as I could possibly go. All right? But this is an acceptable and a perfectly aerodynamic worthy airspeed. Now, I might want to stay in the air the longest, like you mentioned, if I have an engine failure. That was a great relationship or correlation. Would I want to use this airspeed if I had a fire on the airplane? Thank you. Okay. What airspeed do I want to use if I have a fire? The only correct answer is the maximum speed to find the ground. Okay, that's the only right answer. Okay, so don't do glide speed if we're flying the thing and it's on fire. Okay. Now then, ratio of wing to span height. Okay, once I get closer to the ground, remember we have two different kinds of drag. What are they again? Induced drag and parasite drag. Okay, I don't know why every book says parasite drag first. It's a little bit crazy to me because induced drag is what I get, right? Every kind of drag that's created by lift. And then what's parasite drag? Everything that does not create lift. So if I tell you what creates lift first and then everything that's not is just parasite. Okay. But if I get closer to the ground, and by closer to the ground, I mean one wingspan. What's the wingspan on a Cessna? 36. So if I get within one wingspan or 36 feet from the ground, induced drag rapidly decreases.
Because of
Ground effect. And this becomes very evident within 1/2 wingspan. So 18 feet to the ground, you now have an airplane that is very very easy to fly if you want to stay in the air the longest. What am I trying to do at 18 feet though? Probably. I'm either trying to take off, which then I just take off and away we go, or I'm trying to land. So I don't want to stay in the air the longest if I'm trying to land. This makes it challenging to land the airplane when you get into ground effect. You will spend your first 24 landings trying to figure out this part. Okay? Once you figure out, well, honestly, once you figure out the fact that the entire approach up until then needs to be a nice straight line and stabilized with very little control input, you'll probably finish the rest of it good then. But this last little piece, you'll spend at least 24 landings trying to figure out how to manipulate the controls. We have very good instructors. You guys hear me telling you some of the bad things about all instructors, and I'm not talking about just ours. I'm telling you, all instructors have certain, like, all 4 forces are equal. Well, that's just, you know, they get confused and excited when they're talking about it. But I can tell you that the instructors are usually very, very good at coaching you and helping you through that landing segment, that last little bit, okay? Which part of the landing gear do we touch down on first? Not the front one, okay. If you guys just get the main gear, that's good. But the upwind tire, okay. I know, this guy's a jerk. All right. So, yeah, the airplane becomes very efficient right there.